Okay. Today, we're going to actually, we have some guests that are really old friends because not only are they old friends of mine, but they're old friends of yours as students because you've been hearing their music over the past month or so. You've heard some songs from Robert Burns, Green Grow the Rushes. You've heard the Yeats poems, When You Were Old and Gray, and For Anne Gregory. You've heard Robert Browning's Love Among the Ruins, and you've heard Dafydd am Gwilym. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, Steve. You've heard Dafydd's Lament, all sung by Steve Reese, who has arranged these poems and set them to music, and Kelly Bancroft. Welcome, Steve Reese and Kelly Bancroft, my colleagues, my old friends, my former band mates. Steve is the band leader and Kelly is the lead singer. And today we're going to talk about those songs that you've heard, and also just about the activity of taking poetry and putting it to music. So, Steve and Kelly, Steve, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your translator, poet, scholar, critic, and a songwriter. How do those activities, how do those go together? What's it like what's the difference or the similarities between writing music, arranging poetry and setting it to music, and writing your own poems?
Well, I think the chief difference is that with poems, the instrument is the voice and the ear. And insofar as you're creating a music out of words, it's the spoken voice and the ear that sort of tell you whether you're happy with what you've got. I think that creating a song brings in physically another instrument. And as soon as that happens, your body is engaged in a way that it isn't as fully when you're simply sitting with words or typing or handwriting a poem. So I think it makes a huge difference. Part of what happens when you feel like you've got a song where you want it is that you feel a harmony not only between thought and speech, but between thought, speech, and this thing that you're plucking, or whatever the instrument happens to be. And the whole body is sort of involved, and you say, yeah, that feels good, that feels right, I like playing that. So I think that's one of the things that differentiates them, connects them too. It's just different instruments.
That's really interesting.
Well,
I wish I played an instrument.
Well, what you guys also, it's amazing, we were talking earlier about the difficulty and awkwardness of Zoom, but I had no idea that you guys had already arranged this for Walt, as Steve was talking, for Walt to turn and start to listen like that was really amazing, because he went up the stairs. It's like, yes, there are other things involved. There are other instruments. There are other beings.
Cats may appear at any time.
Going along with that other instrument, that sense of, and you have chosen certain poems, and interestingly, as we've heard, set them to very different kinds of music. So you would have received these poems, obviously, on the page, and then somehow transposed them. And just to give some examples, I mean, When You Were Old and Gray, which Kelly sings so beautifully, I think everybody would get why that song has a certain cadence, because it's slow, it's beautiful. But For Anne Gregory, on the other hand, there's nothing on the page that would have suggested the kind of fast, I don't even know what you would call it, not being a musician, but the kind of speedier, more percussive beat of that song. How does that work?
How does that work, Steve?
What's in that head?
Well, we were both surprised by that, don't you think?
Yeah.
The way it kind of surfaced.
I think it's part of it is that it's a funny song. You know, who has a stanza that begins, "I could get a hair dye"? You know, I mean, it's a comic song about. I mean, with the message is profound, wanting to be loved for who you are and not some physical attribute. But right from the beginning, you know, when he describes her hair as those honey-colored ramparts, you know, that's a hilarious word choice. So, and a rampart is a defense. You know, it's a defensive structure, but it's the thing that's drawing the guys. You know, and that's the whole point of the song. Guys are going to love you because of your hair, and not yourself. Only God can love you for yourself.
It's really sad.
Yeah. What's your counter to the God argument? Well, I'll get a hair dye. So dun, 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 you know, that there's a kind of Irish grounding rhythm there, and I knew that a bodhrán that you play would hit that rhythm very nicely, and so it seemed to call for something a little more rollicking and something where I think the ending of the song is nice, where Kelly just keeps saying, "And not my yellow hair, and not my yellow hair, and not my yellow," you know, it's sort of a song that's saying, "Damn it, love me for who I am," you know, and not these other things. So it seemed like it needed a spirit of energy and fun.
What a wonderful way of approaching poems, you know, it rather than, you know, explicating them, you know, to say, okay, what kind of music would this poem invoke, or, you know, what other, you know, some non-literary way of looking at it would break open our sense of what many poems are. And certainly that's the case with Daffod's Lament. You know, I did go back and look at some of your source material there, and you know, the poems that you're drawing from when they're translated by other people certainly are stilted, and, you know, they're from the Welsh, obviously, but the translations don't bear the signature that you bring to that song, not only in terms of, like, and I've called it sounds like muddy waters, you know, but also the way that you you know, do some of the incredibly, you know, the medieval colloquialisms of that song, you know. How did you, so you were actually engaged in several kinds of transpositions. Musically, you chose a certain genre, really, and then also you brought the poem into an idiom that's different from any of the translations I saw.
Yeah, that one, more than any of the others, is a product of drawing from multiple sources and creating my own thing that was singable. Because most of the translations don't give you, I mean, Yeats, you know, it's iambic tetrameter or whatever, you've got the 4 beats in place, but the translations of the Welsh tend not to rely on the forms that the Welsh employ, which are dazzling. I've never tried to write in some of those forms, but so yeah, that was very much a composite thing, and there are 2 voices in it. And so for Kelly's part, there's really 2 kinds of music going on. There's the part that Daffod sings, or the speaker sings, about not getting women anymore. And then the music changes.
Yeah.
When it comes to Kelly's voice. And I had to be cognizant too of putting it into a key. This is one thing when somebody else is singing, it has to be in a key that person's going to be comfortable in.
Which is up for debate often. He always thinks that I should sing higher than I do, and I'm naturally kind of mid-range. And so he'll put it super high, and I'm like, I'm going to sound like breathe down. We need to breathe down, breathe down.
But yeah, that was one of the fun things about that song is assembling it in a way that it would it would be sayable naturally, but also putting into two registers. Because when Kelly's part kicks in, the strumming becomes ding, 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 that kind of thing. And a little more lively because she's saying, this guy's, we got to read on this guy. Don't go near him.
Yeah. I some of the lines, of course, are just so colloquial and immediate, like, they came naturally as the deer. I say 2 a day were average, which is just a wonderful line. And I want to make T-shirts still out of, it's unnatural, it's villainy.
Kind of. Thinking about that line, 2 a day was average. 2 a day were average. That, I don't know, there's something about it. I don't know how to describe. I don't know, there's just something special about the way that it just makes me laugh, and it's just really, there's something special about just that phrase in the music.
Well, it's very funny because it's anticlimax, I think you would call it, because they came there naturally as the deer, Well, that's that's lovely, But then he has to mathematize it. It's like, I'd say, let's see, it's probably 2 a day.
It was huge, beautiful.
Right. Or the cricket in my neck to show, those kinds of things.
Right, great detail.
Yeah. Funny stuff. And then certainly with Browning, that maybe that's the most dramatic for me example of a poem that I would have just passed by. On the page. I mean, the students are going to be reading his Last Duchess, and which I love. I think that's a great poem. A poem that is really risky in a lot of ways and has so much more to say to us, I think, in the post-Me Too era than it might have even had to say to those Victorians who first heard it, but or first saw it. But I Love 'Em on the Ruins. When I read it, at least. And certainly it's impossible for me to read now without hearing your beautiful rendition of it. It feels a little bloated or a little kind of, flat. And yet the song is just, I think, incredible. And you have played with the text itself. I mean, unlike the Yeats, where you do, the only Yeats that you play with is, as you say, at the end, you'll have Kelly repeat the Yeats line. But for Love 'Em on the Ruins, you really kind of edited.
Yeah. I think it's one of those poems that has in it things I just don't like. One of them is its rhyme, its rhythm and the way it rhymes. It has this long line and then it has this like 2-syllable line that is a complete rhyme, full rhyme with what just came before, and it sounds awkward as hell. I mean,
you remember what it is?
I don't know what the actual pattern is, but I think if your students saw a couple of lines from it, they would kind of go, geez, that really sounds odd. So, and it would be really hard to make a song out of that shape, and so I just changed the shape entirely, cut repetitions, condensed, and included a chorus that says love is best, because that's really where the poem is going. And so I just sort of amplified that idea a little bit. I love the poems. I love that little ruin where they meet, and there's the little flower growing out of the stone, a house leek. I wouldn't know a house leek if I ate one. But the sentiment of the poem, the grandeur of history and of empire and all of that thing is a traditional theme, I think. But I think he handles it real well. I'm not a big fan of the poem itself all the time. So yeah, that's why I did a lot of changing of the shape.
And if you think about it, what I love, just aside from the fact that I think you've made a beautiful song out of that poem, which is, as you say, problematic in some structural ways, but the fact that we can feel invited to treat these poems as living material for new art is not only a tribute, but is just such a source of opportunity and life, kind of for the current art. And I guess you have to, in a sense, have that. You mentioned earlier the body and the instrument. You have to have that instrument almost as a kind of a rampart,
Right.
as a way of saying, I'm not rewriting the poem. I'm turning it into a song with the necessities of this genre and the way that this does it. So, that, and of course you've done that also not only with poems that are canonical, but with Kelly's prose poem, Not Enough Zeros, about and I think you've taken from Kelly's several themes from several of her prose poems there. And I want to ask Kelly, you obviously were part of that, and Not Enough Zeros is a song. Not Enough Zeros is not the title. It's the $6 Million Man is the subject of the prose poem, and a series. There's a series of poems where you're dealing with, I guess, a little bit of the same issues that Yeats is dealing with. What's real and what's mechanical, what's artificial. How did you respond when you were hearing your own work being transposed into another genre?
I guess it felt a little, I guess I was a little self-conscious, but I was also a little excited by it. And because it was taking pieces of the poem and not the entire poem, it was interesting to see how Steve was able to write it and it still pulled from the concept of the poem with just using, a few lines from the poem. So it was, I liked it. It was something that would not have occurred to me. Of course, it would not have occurred to me to do that.
Right. And that Kelly is a playwright as well as a poet, and I've seen some, not only and a filmmaker too. You and Craig, of course, did Arriving at Bessie, a beautiful short film. So you've been involved, say, on both sides of the camera or both sides of the stage for a number of kinds of projects, and they've all been collaborative because as a playwright, you have to, in a sense, engage with the director, the actors, and tell us a little bit about that process. You experienced it with the song, but you've also experienced it in other contexts.
Yeah, I playwriting came, it's a pretty new thing to me, 4 or 5, I guess about 5 years. And I wasn't trained as a playwright, or I didn't study playwriting other than just reading plays and going to plays. But I was always drawn to that there was somebody that you can imagine sitting in a theater watching you. Whereas, when you're writing a poem perhaps, or you're writing an essay, I've got a kind of vague, blurry audience out there that I'm thinking about. But with a play, somebody's going to be, hopefully somebody's going to be sitting there watching it. And I know how exciting that is. And I like that collaborative process, even though as I'm writing it, it's not collaborative. It is in my mind, a collaborative process. And then when it finally gets on stage, and I've been lucky enough to have a few of those done, it's just the best thing ever. Right. Really, for me, it's the most satisfying art form that I've tried. These words that you've written and this story you've imagined, you've handed it to somebody, and they have some questions. They may have some changes. They ask you about them, and my work is done. And I can sit in the audience, and I can, there are 100 people sitting there watching this story that I've written, and it's the most satisfying feeling I've ever had. And now I'm excited to have another play. That makes me excited to talk about it. So yeah, it is collaborative on different levels. And if you have the right director, and I have the last couple of directors I've had, they invite my input, they invite me to go to rehearsals, and it's just so exciting. It's like when you were a kid and you made up stories, and then like your friend came along and they wanted to be part of the story, and probably now you've got 2 people doing the story, and then you bring another friend and they want to enact the story. And it really appeals to my communal desire and my belief in people doing things together. but also having isolation, which I crave.
Well, of course, you've made the terrible, or had the terrible misfortune of descending into poetry now with your new book, and I bad news about that. There really won't be anybody in the seats. But with your new book, but let me ask you that. I mean, as you put that book together, this new book that'll be coming out next year, 2021, or
no, it'll probably come out in a couple of months, actually.
A couple of months. Okay, great. Was that informed by this excitement of sharing, and do you envision, if not play, obviously, but some means of, as Steve has done with transposing poems to music, do you foresee any possible collaborative aspects of promoting or enhancing or understanding this book in a different way? That's a tough question. and please tell me the answer, because I gotta know.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. But I can tell you that I've had a couple of experiences. I was talking to a friend, and I'm like, what am I going to do? This book is coming out, and nobody can leave their home. There are Zoom readings, and there have been Zoom launches and things like that. And she's like, well, maybe we could gather 20 people in my really big backyard, and we could socially distance and have this reading, and she would cater it or whatever. And I said, that's great, but I would like to have, she's a dancer and a choreographer. And she's like, I would really like to have a movement piece to one of your, and I'm like, do it, whatever piece you want. There's a couple that are appealing to her. So that's kind of an interesting possibility.
Yes.
Another interesting thing that's come up, and it just came up actually this weekend, is that when I was looking at what I wanted to use for a cover for the book, I had been thinking about my friend Mary's paintings. She's done a couple of covers for Stephen. She does great paintings. And I decided to throw out at least one of my own visual images that I've made, and we're going to make one of those the cover.
Oh, great.
So it's kind of cool that I've got these other sort of elements moving in together. And then the one other thing I would say is I'm trying to play with creating a website that's, I'm trying not to make it clunky. This is new to me. I'm trying to make a website, and it occurred to me that I want to have a page on my website that's just links of artists that I like and support, particularly local ones. So your book, Steve's book, other book. I want to make a list of all the other artists that I care about, or visual artists, dancers, just to show that there's this community.
Right.
And that just occurred to me yesterday, actually. So I'm kind of excited about that too. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I think your question is a good one, and I want to think more about it.
And I think that what the theme of what I'm hearing, I mean, we talk about, turning poems into songs, turning words into plays that are engaged with many people, performing things. I mean, the theme seems to me is collaboration. Is when you change something, you're really including others and taking something that may have been old and written by somebody who's long deceased, and suddenly making us feel as if we're present at its creation. And I think that, when one of the questions we ask, I'm sure the students have asked themselves this: why read old dead British people? Why do we choose this particular, island? Are we just having to kind of, roller skate through a certain era so that we get qualified and we get to check off, yes, I did Brit Lit too, which Steve, you've taught many times, I know. And, there has to be another reason. And it has to be a different kind of engagement. You have to see Ode to a Nightingale, or, we've heard Mooney reciting William Blake, for instance, and Harvey Hicks reciting Ode to a Nightingale. It has to feel like it's here, now, present. And that's what you're both doing with the music, with the plays, with the transposition, with your entering into both, as Kelly is saying, the local community, but also the community that we all share with the past, the dead. And so let me ask each one of you, to put you on the spot here, to do a little Zoom reading. If you just share a poem from your own work.
Okay. Actually, I'm gonna read one of the sort of prose poems. I'm never comfortable with that, with that word, prose poem. But I'm gonna read one of those from the book that you were just talking about, that section that they're interconnected, and they're about sort of me as a child or as a young adult engaging with figures in pop culture. And this is actually the last one in that series. It ends that section, and it's called Dear John Boy. And you know, John Boy was Richard Thompson with the big mole in the Waltons, and he was the first writer character I ever experienced. I mean, that's what he was. He was a writer, and I just loved that show. I still love that show. So this is called Dear John Boy. Dear John Boy, I am writing to you from my attic room by candlelight, typing on a royal the color of waxed lips. I'm not on Walton Mountain. The only mountain I know is the heap I have left, the ex-husband, the shepherd, the Siamese, the house. From my desk, I can see the graveyard of my ancestors where I've walked, climbing the little slope where the infants are buried, pinwheels stabbing the ground. The cross my grandpa carved for his firstborn, her skin the color of the sky, leans to the left, the wingless angel of my fallen great uncle poised mid-flight. But I prefer the view from here, my fingers pounding home row, the impossible reach of my pinky for the plus sign to make everything add up. I know you understand. Those nights you sit in the skull of the house composing while the world sleeps. I know you're trying to believe that the holes in our lives become a string of pearls, or at least an ellipses. Which is why I loved you then, will always love you, my antiquated heartache, my Blue Ridge bow. Good night, John Boy, good night.
That is wonderful. Kelly, you have no idea how serendipitous that is, because in fact, the students have already heard John Boy. YouTube has been the lifeblood of this course. You can find everything on YouTube, and including things like Waiting for Godot performed by guinea pigs.
That's on my list. That sounds amazing.
It's just, you just type in and you sit there mesmerized for hours. One of them is John Boy reading The Windhover by Gerard Manley Hopkins as part of the show. So
in Walton's episode?
In the Walton's episode, that's his birthday gift to
there
his
goes
mother.
my afternoon.
So,
that's what I'm doing this afternoon.
So that's perfect. Thank you, Kelly.
Cool.
Steve?
Oh, okay. This is an old poem, but I think it connects with what we've been talking about. It's a poem that tries to explain why we all used to get together on Saturday nights and make music. And aside from just the sheer fun. And so this poem is called Why These Saturday Nights? Because we make moan without melody. Because so much fingering is guesswork, is groping improvisation on the dark motifs of throat and thigh and shoulder blade, in all the arcane modes of the body to which touch brings its tin ear. Because the clock keeps a mirthless time, because its hands think only to chase and lap each other, never to turn back and clap. Because our bones will not be whittled into pipes at last, will beat no drum, nor our veins be drained, stretched, and fiddled. Because the lids of our cases will be lowered over us, we spring these latches and tune. Because moment yields to moment and is gone, we crowd round this refrain. Because of all the silence in which spent lives are honored, we stomp and strum and raise this hell.
Why these Saturday nights? Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
And if we could end with a song?
We were kind of in the mood for a little melancholy Robbie Burns, if you don't mind.
That sounds great.
John Anderson.
Oh.
You have room?
Yep, I got room. Can the guitar be heard?
Yes.
Spoken, sung by Kelly, spoken by a woman's voice addressing John Anderson, my Joe, which is not a cup of coffee, but your guy, right? And it's about, yeah, getting old. And I love the second stanza because it starts out with what seems to me a literal hill that they used to go up together and have wonderful days. But then by the time you get to the second half of the verse, it's clearly a metaphoric hill. We're coming down that hill now and we'll sleep together at the foot.
John Anderson, my Joe John, when we were first acquainted, your locks were like the raven, your bonny brow was brent, but now your brow is bald, John, your locks are like the snow. Blessings on your frosty paw, John Anderson, my Joe. John Anderson, my Joe John, we climbed the hill together, and many a canty day, John, we've had with one another. Now we maun totter down, John, and hand in hand we'll go, and sleep together at the foot. John Anderson, my Joe.
Oh, how beautiful.
That's a great song.
Isn't that a great song? Oh, it did my heart good.
Mine too, mine too.
Thank you, Kelly and Steve.
Oh, thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you crossing paths when paths can be crossed.
Very good. Thanks, Phil.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.